The detective's name was Karen Olatunji. She was mid-40s, compact with a leather portfolio under her arm and the particular stillness of someone who has knocked on a great many doors and has learned, over years of doing it, not to show what she expects to find behind them. She looked at me when I opened mine, not a long look, just a second of taking me in. And then she said, "Are you Dana Whitfield?" I said yes. "My name is Detective Olatunji. I'm with the Financial Crimes Unit. I was hoping you could spare some time today. We're investigating a matter involving your grandmother's estate, and we've been told you may have information relevant to the case." I looked at her. Then I stepped back and held the door open and said, "I've been waiting 4 years for this conversation. Please come in." "My name is Dana Whitfield. I'm 34 years old. 4 years ago, I asked a question at a family dinner that ended every relationship I had ever known. I was called paranoid. I was called unstable. I was removed from group chats. My calls went unreturned. My grandmother died without speaking to me again, and I was not told about her funeral until 3 days after it happened. Last month, a detective knocked on my door. I want to tell you the whole story. Not because I need the validation, though I will be honest with you that validation is not nothing. After 4 years of being told the thing you knew was true was evidence of your mental decline, I want to tell it because what happened in my family is not as unusual as it should be. Because elder financial abuse is one of the most common and least reported crimes against older adults, and because the people who raise concerns about it are frequently silenced before anything can be done. Because the word they used to manage me is used on people every day, in families all over the country, for exactly the same reason. And because I kept records for 6 years, and a detective called them exactly right, and I want the people who are currently keeping records to know that keeping records is the correct thing to be doing. This is the true version of what happened. It is told by the person who was there and who wrote it down. My grandmother, Ruth Whitfield, was the kind of woman who made a room feel organized simply by entering it. Not through force of personality. She was not loud or commanding, but through a quality of attentiveness that communicated itself. She noticed things. She remembered things. She had kept the family address book for 40 years, updated in her small, precise handwriting every time someone moved or married or had a child, and the address book was fat with revisions because she had never discarded an entry, only added. She had also, over 60 years of careful living, accumulated something. My grandfather died when I was 11. He had worked 30 years for the same manufacturing company, saved consistently, owned the house they had lived in since my father was born. When he died, everything passed to my grandmother, according to the plan they had made together. She was not wealthy in any showy sense. She drove an older car and bought clothes at the same 2 stores for decades. But she was stable in the deep way of people who have lived carefully for a long time and have the result of that carefulness sitting quietly in accounts that are understood to exist, if not discussed at dinner. She had talked to me about the accounts once, when I was 26, on one of my regular Sunday visits. She was in a reflective mood that afternoon. Her health had given her some minor concerns that year. Nothing acute, but enough to make her think about arrangements. She had told me about the house, the savings, 2 investment accounts my grandfather had opened in the 1980s that had been quietly growing since. She had told me there was a sum set aside specifically for her 4 grandchildren, myself, my brother, and my 2 cousins. She had not told me the exact numbers. She had told me enough that I understood what existed. She had also told me something else, something I stored without fully knowing why. She said that my father, her son, had recently asked to be added as a co-signatory on one of her accounts. She said she was thinking about it. She said he had told her that if anything ever happened to her, having his name on the account would simplify things, make it easier for the family. I asked her how she felt about that. She looked at her tea for a moment. Then she said, "He's my son. I trust my son." It was not an answer to my question. I noticed that. I noted it. I had not said anything more. I had changed the subject and finished my tea and driven home and written down the date and the exact exchange, her words, my question, her non-answer, in the running document I kept of things that seemed worth recording. I had started the document 2 years earlier, after a smaller thing I had noticed and not known what to do with. I was not sure yet what any of it meant. I knew that I was the kind of person who preferred to have a record over not having one. I did not know yet how important that preference was going to become. I want to be specific about the timeline because specificity is what separates a witness from someone who is, as my family later put it, just making accusations, and because the detective told me, at the end of our 90 minutes, that the timeline was the most valuable thing I had given her, not the observations themselves, which could have been remembered and retold, but the fact that I had recorded them at the time, with dates, in a document that predated the investigation by years. The timeline shows something that my family's account of events did not account for. I had been noticing things before the fall, before the power of attorney, before any of the arrangements that my father would later describe as practical responses to my grandmother's vulnerability. I had been noticing things and recording them for 2 years before the birthday dinner. That matters. It means the observations were not constructed after the fact. It means the concern was genuine and contemporary and specific, not a narrative assembled in retrospect to justify a falling out. It means I knew what I saw. In the spring of my 30th year, my grandmother had a fall. Small one. She caught her foot on the porch step going to the mailbox, went down on one knee, scraped her palm. My father drove her to urgent care. She was fine. In the 3 months after the fall, 2 things happened. The first, my father proposed that my grandmother move to a smaller apartment closer to my parents' house. He framed this as a safety measure as she was living alone. The house was large. The fall had shown that something could happen. My grandmother agreed. The house was sold. I did not know the house had been sold until I called my grandmother one Sunday, and her number had changed. She gave me the new address. I said, "Grandma, what happened with the house?" She said, with the slightly vague quality her speech had begun to take that year, "Your father took care of it. He handles all of that now." He handles all of that now. I wrote down the date and what she had said. Word for word. The second thing. At a family dinner shortly after, my father said something about managing a payment from one of my grandmother's accounts. The way he said it was unremarkable, conversational, as though this were already established and ordinary. I looked at my grandmother when he said it. She was eating. She did not look up. After dinner, I sat beside her and asked, quietly, whether she had everything she needed, whether her accounts were accessible to her, whether the arrangements she had made were ones she understood. She said, "Your father helps with all of that." She said he set things up after the fall because it was easier. She said, when I asked if she had spoken to an attorney independently before making any changes, "I don't remember exactly. Your father knows what he's doing, Dana." I asked if she had her own access, if she could independently call her bank, access her accounts, make a transaction without going through him. She looked at her hands. She said, "I think so. I think so." I went home. I sat at my kitchen table. I wrote down everything she had said, with the time and the date and where we had been sitting when she said it. Then I called Neka, my best friend since college, and told her what I was thinking. She said, "Do you know for certain?" I said, "No, but I know enough to be worried." She said, "Then you need to figure out what to do with it." I spent the next few months trying to figure out what to do with it. I looked into elder financial abuse. I researched what a power of attorney meant and what it allowed and what protections existed. I consulted briefly and without naming my family specifically with someone at my firm who had legal knowledge. I came to understand that the arrangements my father had made were, on their surface, legal. that a power of attorney granted voluntarily by a competent adult was not automatically exploitative, and that without my grandmother's own testimony or access to her financial documents, what I had was concern without the documentary foundation to act on it through official channels. I decided that I needed to raise it in the family first, that there might be a simple explanation, that I might be wrong, I was not wrong. But I raised it in exactly the wrong way, and that error cost me 4 years. My grandmother's 79th birthday, my parents' house. A Sunday in October, the whole family gathered, a roast dinner and a birthday cake with candles and photographs and the warm noise of a family occasion going normally. After the cake, during coffee, my father said something, I cannot remember the exact words, something about a transfer for household expenses, and he referenced an account number that I recognized as my grandmother's. I should have said nothing. I should have waited, asked to speak to my father privately, scheduled a conversation when I had more information and when my grandmother was not present. I should have gone to Adult Protective Services first, or consulted a proper elder law attorney, or found a social worker with expertise in these situations. I know all of this now. I knew some of it then. What I did instead was ask in a room full of family in a tone that had 4 months of accumulated worry in it. Dad, which of Grandma's accounts is that? My father looked at me. Just an account I help manage. Easier for her. Does Grandma have her own access? Dana, Grandma. I looked at her directly. Do you know how much money is in your accounts? Can you access them independently if you needed to? The room was very quiet, the particular quiet of a family that has suddenly become an audience. My grandmother looked at me. Her expression was complicated, a discomfort I had seen before, and underneath it something else, something I've thought about many times since. Something that might have been, if she had been in a room without my father, a different answer. But my father was in the room, and she looked at her hands. My father said, with the measured calm of someone who has anticipated this moment, Dana, this is not the time or the place. Grandma, I just want to make sure you're okay. She's fine, she's well cared for. His voice stayed level. And I would appreciate you not turning your grandmother's birthday into an accusation. I'm asking a question. You're making a scene. My mother said my name. My brother looked at the tablecloth. My 2 cousins looked at each other. My aunt touched her husband's arm. The dinner ended shortly after. My grandmother was helped into her coat by my father. She said goodbye to everyone. When she got to me, she took my hand for a moment and held it and looked at me. And she said nothing at all, just looked at me. Then my father said, "Come on, Mom," gently, and she let go of my hand, and they walked to the door. I drove home. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my building for 20 minutes before I could go inside. Within 48 hours, my mother called. She did not call to address what I had raised. She called to address me. She told me that the family was worried, that I had been behaving unusually for some time, that what I had said at the birthday dinner was hurtful and unfounded and had upset my grandmother on what was supposed to be a joyful occasion. She said my father was deeply hurt. She said everyone felt I needed to speak to someone, a professional perhaps, someone who could help me work through whatever I was going through. I said, I asked where Grandma's money was going. That's not a mental health issue. That's a reasonable question. My mother said, the way you asked it was not reasonable. Then let's discuss the substance of what I asked. Your father has power of attorney. That was your grandmother's choice. He has done nothing wrong. Can I speak with Grandma directly, alone? That's not a good idea right now. 3 days later, my brother texted me. He said he wasn't taking sides. He was worried about me. He thought I should apologize to Dad. He said all of this in 3 careful texts that were each individually kind and collectively useless, in the way that people are when they are managing a situation rather than engaging with it. I asked him, do you have any concerns about Grandma's finances? He did not answer that question. He said he thought I needed to talk to someone, Dana, for my own sake, for your own sake. I put my phone down, and I sat with those 3 words for a long time. For your own sake. The implicit message of that phrase, the concern here is your mental state, not Grandma's money. You are the problem to be addressed. What you said is evidence of a condition, not evidence of anything I should think about. He had chosen consciously to put his attention on my well-being rather than my grandmother's. And in choosing that, he had made himself available to a narrative that was much more comfortable than the one I was offering. The narrative that said, Dana is struggling, Dana needs help. Isn't it sad? Rather than the narrative that said, where did the money go? The group chat went quiet, not absent. I could see the notification previews. I could see that activity was happening, that plans were being made, and photos were being shared, and the family was continuing to be a family. I was simply no longer in the version of it where those things were visible to me. A new chat had been made. I was not in it. I discovered this the way you discover most exclusions. By being referred to in a conversation I had not been part of. I tried to reach my grandmother. Her direct line went to a message that had been changed. When I called my parents' house, my mother said she was resting. When I called my father's cell, he did not pick up. The word, when I heard it, through Neka, who had a friend connected to my family and who told me carefully, preparing me for what I was about to understand, was unstable. Dana is going through something. She's not doing well. We're all very worried about her. She said some things at the birthday dinner that were very hurtful. We hope she gets the help she needs. I heard this, and I sat with it for a long time, not because it surprised me, because it was so precisely targeted. Not a lie exactly. They were worried about me in the way that you are worried about something that is inconvenient. Not a truth. I was not unstable. Something more effective than either, a reframing, a reclassification of the event and of me within it. The birthday dinner had contained a question. My father had answered the question by making the asker the story. I want to stop here and explain what that word does in detail, because I think people who have not experienced it directly may not understand how complete its effect is. When someone calls you unstable, they are not just characterizing your mental state, they are removing your standing as a credible person. Every question you ask after that becomes evidence of the instability. Every expression of distress at being labeled this way becomes further proof. The word is self-reinforcing. There is no response to it that doesn't seem to confirm it. If you're calm, you're being calculated. If you're upset, you're being erratic. There is no version of you that the word has not already decided on. And in a family context, it spreads faster than anything you can say to counter it. By the time I understood what had happened, the narrative had reached aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends who had known me my entire life, and all of them had received the same information. Dana is struggling. Dana said some very hurtful things. Dana needs help. Not. Dana asked where Grandma's money went. That question had been removed from the story entirely. The story was only me, and what I had done, and what it suggested about my state of mind. If you have ever been called unstable for noticing something that someone needed you not to notice, please drop a comment. I want to know you're here, because I want what I'm about to tell you about the detective's visit to reach the people who most need to hear it. I am going to tell you about the 4 years honestly, without making them into a clean narrative of resilience, because they were not clean. I went to work. I maintained my apartment. I saw Neka. I continued seeing my therapist, Dr. Marcus, who I had been seeing voluntarily for 2 years before any of this, for the ordinary reasons people see therapists: processing stress, developing tools for difficult conversations, the regular maintenance of a life. My family had tried to use this against me. My mother had mentioned it to relatives as context. Dana has been seeing someone, which tells you something. as though having a therapist were confirmation of their characterization rather than evidence of ordinary adult self-care, as though the choice to actively maintain your mental health were a symptom of mental illness. Dr. Marcus was not someone who validated the family's account of me. He was someone who helped me hold an extremely difficult situation without being consumed by it, which is a different and harder thing. He said to me once, in the second year, "You are carrying something real. The question is not whether it's real. The question is what you can do with it while you're carrying it." I think about that often. In the first year, I consulted an elder law attorney. Her name was Patricia Hollis, and she had a small firm that specialized in estate disputes and elder law. I sat in her office on a Tuesday afternoon and told her what I had observed and when, presenting it as I would present anything at work, in order, with dates, with the specific language people had used. She listened carefully. She asked clarifying questions. Then she told me what I already suspected. Without documentary access to my grandmother's accounts, without financial records I could point to, and without my grandmother herself raising concerns or being assessed as having lacked capacity when the power of attorney was signed, the legal avenues available to me were limited. She was not my client. I was not her guardian or her executor. My concerns were credible, but concern without documentation was not, in her words, something she could build a case from. I asked what I could do. She said, "Document. Write down everything you remember from before today and everything that happens going forward. Date every observation. Keep every text, every voicemail, every email. Write down what people say to you and when they say it. If there is ever an investigation—" She paused on the word "if" with the measured caution of someone who wanted me to understand it was not certain. "Your records will be the difference between being a witness and being someone who made accusations." So I documented. I had already started. I continued for 4 years. Every unanswered call, logged with the date and time. Every text that received a non-response or a deflection, saved, with notes on what I had asked and what they had answered instead. Every piece of information that came to me through NACA or through my Aunt Carol, who remained, throughout 4 years, the only family member who treated me as a credible person rather than a problem to be managed, noted carefully with the source and the date and the context. My Aunt Carol is my grandfather's younger sister. She is 71 years old. She has a particular quality of decency that I have come to understand is rarer than it should be. She does not tell people what they want to hear. She tells them what she thinks is true, and she thinks carefully before she speaks, and when she decides something is right, she acts on it regardless of what the acting costs her. She had been friends with my grandmother for 50 years. She had watched what was happening, and she had, through 4 years of careful, quiet contact, given me information I could not have gotten any other way. It was my Aunt Carol who engaged the attorney who eventually contacted the Financial Crimes Unit. I found this out from Detective Olatunji. My aunt had not told me she was doing it. She had simply done it in her quiet and certain way when she had access to the documents she needed. She had spent 3 months with my grandmother's papers after the death before she found what she found, and then she had acted. I thought about that, sitting at my kitchen table after the detective left, my Aunt Carol, 71 years old, going through a dead woman's papers until she found the truth, acting on it without announcing it, without asking permission or waiting for consensus. She had done, alone and without fanfare, the thing I had been trying to do for 4 years and could not. My Aunt Carol was my grandmother's sister-in-law, my grandfather's younger sibling, and she had known my grandmother for 50 years. She told me things carefully over 4 years. That my grandmother had been moved from the apartment to my parents' house, that her direct phone line had been disconnected, that she had good days and harder ones, that she had, as of the 3rd year, been formally diagnosed with moderate Alzheimer's disease and was being cared for at my parents' home. She told me in the 4th year that my grandmother had died. on a Sunday morning, quietly, in the bedroom at my parents' house. The funeral had been the Saturday before she called me. I want to tell you what those 2 sentences cost because I think they read too quickly on the page. My grandmother died on a Sunday morning and was buried on a Saturday, and I was told on the following Tuesday. My Aunt Carol called me from her car, parked outside a grocery store, speaking in a low voice because she was not certain who might be listening to her calls at home. She told me quickly. She said she was sorry. She said she had not known until it was too late that I hadn't been told. I sat in my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon and understood that my grandmother had been buried while I was at my desk processing insurance documents, that the last time I had seen her was 4 years earlier, at a birthday dinner, when she had taken my hand at the door and looked at me and said nothing. And that had been the last time. I had known this might happen. I had tried to prepare for it. Preparation has a ceiling. The actual thing lands in its own way, regardless of how ready you believed yourself to be. I did not go to work the following day. Neka drove to my apartment and we sat on my couch for most of the day without agenda or plan. She brought food I barely ate. She did not ask me to manage how I was feeling or tell me the things people say when they are trying to make grief more comfortable than it can be. She sat with me while I felt it, which is what grief requires, the presence of someone who does not need you to be finished with it yet. On Thursday, I went back to work. That evening, I opened my file and added an entry. I noted the date of my grandmother's death, the date of her funeral, the date I had been notified, and the fact that I had not been given the opportunity to attend. I noted the source of the information and the circumstances under which it had been delivered. I kept going. Karen Olatunji knocked on my door on a Thursday in September, 7 months after my grandmother's death. I had taken the morning off for an appointment and was home when she came, which she later told me was fortunate. She had planned to try again in the afternoon. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table. She told me what she was at liberty to tell me at that stage, which was that the Financial Crimes Unit had received a referral from an attorney engaged by my Aunt Carol, who had been helping to settle the estate and had found documents that did not correspond to the estate plan my grandmother had made before the fall. There were accounts that had been drawn down, transfers to accounts associated with my father, a property sale whose proceeds had not been deposited into my grandmother's estate account. The timeline she was working with, she told me, began approximately 18 months before my grandmother's fall. Before the fall. Before the power of attorney, before the arrangement that my family had presented as a response to the fall. The arrangement had not been a response, it had been a continuation. She asked me what I had observed and when. I told her. I pulled out the document I had been keeping for 6 years, the one that started with the Sunday afternoon conversation about the co-signatory, that continued through the birthday dinner, that ran through 4 years of logged calls and communications and dated observations. She asked me, at the end of the 90 minutes, why I had kept records like this. She said that in her experience, family members who came forward in cases like this usually had memories, things they recalled, sometimes vividly, but rarely the contemporaneous documentation I had provided. The specificity of it was unusual. The dates and the exact language, and the fact that entries had been made the same day as the events they described. I said, because I was told I was unstable. I knew that if I was ever going to be taken seriously, I needed to show exactly what I had observed and exactly when I had observed it. Because a woman with documentation is a witness. A woman without it is just someone who made accusations. She was quiet for a moment. That, she said, is exactly right. She put my file into her leather portfolio and stood to leave. At the door, she paused. Ms. Whitfield, how long have you been carrying this? 6 years, I said, since my grandmother first mentioned the co-signatory. She nodded once. Then she said, we'll be in touch. And she walked to her car. I stood in the open doorway for a moment after she left. The morning was ordinary outside, the kind of morning that does not adjust itself for what has happened inside. I closed the door. I sat down at my kitchen table. I looked at the empty space where her portfolio had been. I had spent 6 years being called unstable for keeping records, and a financial crimes detective had just called those records exactly right. I want to tell you honestly what that felt like, because I think pretending it was neutral would be wrong. It felt like something very heavy, becoming slightly lighter, not resolved, not finished, lighter. I called Neka. She answered on the second ring. I said, "A detective just left my apartment." She said, "Tell me everything." So I told her everything, sitting at my kitchen table in the ordinary Thursday morning, starting from the beginning the way I had started it at the door, my name, and what had happened, and what I had been waiting for. I am going to be honest with you about what I know and what I don't, because I think the honest version is more important than the satisfying one. There is an active investigation. I have given a formal statement. My Aunt Carol is cooperating. There are other family members who have been contacted and who are, I am told, in the process of reconsidering what they thought they knew. My brother called me 2 weeks after the detective's visit. It was the first real conversation in 4 years. Not a careful text, not a managed check-in, an actual phone call, his voice speaking directly to mine. He said, "I should have listened to you." I said, "Yes, you should have." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry. Not in the comprehensive way. He was not yet ready to say the specific things, to name what he had chosen not to see, and what that choosing had cost. He was in the beginning of understanding it, which is different from having understood it. I could hear the difference. I said I needed time to figure out what his apology meant. He said he understood. He said he had been thinking about the birthday dinner, about the moment I had asked the question and he had looked at the tablecloth. He said he had known when he looked down that he was making a choice, that he wanted me to know he knew that. That cost him something to say. I heard it cost him. We were on the phone for 16 minutes. At the end, he said he would call again. I said, "Okay." I meant it cautiously, in the way you mean things when you cannot yet see what they can hold. My cousin David, a quieter member of the family who had been at the birthday dinner and had also, I remembered clearly, looked at the tablecloth when I asked the question, sent me a text the week after my brother's call. It said only, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I knew something was wrong." 8 words. I read it 4 times. I did not respond immediately. I am still deciding what I want to say, taking the time that the question deserves, which is a right I have earned by spending 4 years not taking time with anything, by having every decision made for me by the word that had been put on me. I will respond when I know what I want to say, not before. My grandmother is buried in the cemetery near the house she sold. I went to her grave last month, by myself, on a morning that was cold and completely clear. I brought yellow flowers, simple ones, the kind she had grown in the garden of the house before she had to leave it. I stood at the stone for a while. I told her I was sorry I had not been able to do more sooner. I told her people were now asking the right questions. I told her about the detective and the records and my Aunt Carol and the documents in the portfolio. I told her. I saw it. I said so for 4 years. I kept everything. I don't know if any of that reached her. I said it anyway. I needed to have said it. There is a form of silencing that works specifically because it turns the person raising concerns into the subject of concern. It does not engage with what you saw. It does not argue with the substance of your observation. It reclassifies the seeing. It puts a word on you. Unstable, dramatic, jealous, troubled, making accusations. Any word that shifts the conversation from what you noticed to your fitness to have noticed it. I want to be precise about this because I think people who have not experienced it may not understand how total it is. Once the word is in circulation, everything you do confirms it. If you are calm, you are being calculating. If you are distressed, you are proving you are unstable. If you produce evidence, you are being obsessive. If you let it go, you were obviously wrong to begin with. There is no position available to you that the word has not already colonized. And it spreads fast, faster than anything you can say to counter it. By the time I understood what was happening, it had reached aunts and uncles and cousins and family friends who had known me my entire life. They had received a single, simple piece of information. Dana is struggling. We're all very worried. And that information had done its work before I could offer a competing account. I was a salaried professional. I had maintained my apartment independently for 8 years. I had a clean employment record, a voluntary therapist, functional relationships, a savings account, a running document on my laptop that stretched back 6 years and contained dated observations about what I had seen and when. I was not unstable. I was inconvenient. And the word they chose was not a description, it was a management strategy. If you are being called unstable for noticing something real, I want you to hear this. The speed of the labeling is the evidence. The efficiency with which you were removed from rooms where your presence would have caused problems. That is not proof of your instability. That is proof that you saw something that needed to be contained. Here is what I want you to do. If you are in this, document. Write down what you have observed and when you observed it. Use specific language, not impressions. Date every entry. Keep every text, every voicemail, every email. Write down what people say to you and what they do not say when you ask direct questions. If an elderly relative is involved, find an elder law attorney. Find a social worker who specializes in elder care. Contact your local adult protective services and ask what criteria would need to be met for an investigation. You do not need to have proof to raise a concern. You need a credible account of what you have observed. And do not let the word they used convince you that what you saw was not real. The truth does not expire. It waits quietly in the dated entries of a document that no one knew you were keeping. And eventually, if you have done the work, it finds someone whose job is to come looking for it. Last September, Detective Karen Olatunji knocked on my door. I had been keeping the file for 6 years. I was ready. Thank you for staying with this until the end. I know it was a hard one to sit with. It was a hard one to tell. I want to say one last thing. My grandmother kept an address book for 40 years. Every time someone moved or married or had a child, she added it in her small, precise handwriting. She never discarded an entry. She only added. The last time I saw the book was on a Sunday afternoon when I was 26, when she brought it out to show me something. I don't know where the address book is now. It may have been lost in the move, or the move after that, or in the management of her things by people who did not know what it was. I think about it sometimes. The 40 years of careful record, the handwriting, the names of people she had considered worth keeping. I kept records too, in a different way, for a different purpose. But I kept them in the same spirit she had kept hers, because some things are worth the effort of preserving, because the names and the dates and the exact words matter, because what is written down survives longer than what is only remembered. The truth is patient. I have found that to be exactly correct. If you are keeping records right now for reasons that feel thankless and lonely and invisible, keep going. Date everything. Be specific. Keep the file. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you are in your own version of this. I read every one. See you in the next one.